Hello everybody, Carlos Toro here. It's time for the Fightful Boxing Podcast. Thank you all for coming in and listening to this show. Really do appreciate it. But before I do, a couple of plugs out of the way to start. Head on over to Fightful.com for all your latest news in pro wrestling, MMA, and boxing. The new Fightful Boxing newsletter where I take a look at Tyson Fury's win over Tom Schwarz and what it means for the future. A little preview of the Cancio versus Alberto Machado fight. Recapping the madness that was the WBSS this past weekend. And I give my predictions for the rest of the year in boxing. And there's a couple that may seem not that bold. There's a couple that may seem really bold. And there's one that, I'm not going to tell you which one, but there is one where it basically got ruined like hours after it got posted up on Fightful.com. But hey, that's what happens when you make these predictions articles. You never know what happens when you write them. They could be busted up hours after they get published live. So don't I look foolish? But regardless of that, FightfulBoxing.com has all the latest news in the world of boxing, whether it be interviews, columns, newsletters, news articles, recaps, interviews, the whole 9 yards. And the same goes for Fightful MMA and FightfulWrestling.com. We got tons and tons of coverage on everything you want in combat sports and in pro wrestling. But with that being said, it's time for the Fightful Boxing Podcast. And boy, we have a real loaded show today. We got Nick Skok from Ring TV, who is kind enough to join me and talk about the Kazuto Ioka versus Aston Palicte fight, which was streamed on UFC Fight Pass on Wednesday morning, Wednesday 8 a.m. Eastern, 5 a.m. Eastern on the not Eastern, Pacific time. If you're out there in the West Coast, we're going to be talking a lot more about that. You also get to hear from Cancio and Alberto Machado, who was in a recent media call, and I took part in it, and I got to ask them a couple of questions regarding not just the fight that they got tomorrow, June 21, at the Fantasy Spring Resorts Casino on the Zone, but also of what the ramifications for their careers could be like if they win their next fights or lose their next fights. Lots of good stuff on this show. But before we get all into that, obviously, the biggest news story, or I guess the biggest story in boxing now today, remains the state of the heavyweight division. But now the focus has shifted on to Tyson Fury and his win over Tom Schwarz, second round TKO in Las Vegas on ESPN Plus. And my God, there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, let's talk about the fight itself. It was nothing worth watching, not whatsoever. Tom Schwarz, unbeaten German fighter who was ranked really, really high by the WBO, perhaps much too high after seeing the performance that he gave out on Saturday night. So when you're kind of looking at this fight, and you figured, boy, Tyson Fury is gonna show off a little bit. Not really gonna try his hardest. He's not going to try to end this quickly. You want to give the fans a good show. Maybe this will go 6, 7, 8 rounds. Might even go even longer. But I was half right in that sense that he was kind of showing off a little bit. But my God, he took care of Tom Schwarz real quick. Schwarz wasn't able to land really anything concrete. Tyson Fury, his head movement was outstanding. He really was, avoiding punches left and right up against the ropes. It was kind of, somewhat Ali-ish with the whole rope-a-dope strategy, but it was, but you're not saying Tyson Fury is Muhammad Ali, but, there you can see some similarities in certain moments of the fight. Fury drops Tom Schwarz in the second round, and right after that, Fury unleashes this combination of punches, and the fight is stopped in the second round. So that didn't even last 2 complete rounds, and Tyson Fury looked really, really good in this fight. He looked in phenomenal shape. Loved the hand speed, loved the upper body movement that he had in this fight. But let's be honest, this fight was what it was meant to be. It was kind of like in the old pro wrestling days when you have a new star or a new guy, a big monster, you want to make him out to look good. So you send out these weaker guys who are not meant to win, or not even meant to even put up a fight, and just job out to the bigger star, and just to sort of make them look good. And that's what happened on Saturday night. Tyson Fury is the new acquisition for Top Rank, the new big name for ESPN. Tom Schwarz is unbeaten German, but no one really gave him a chance to win. Not in the same sense of, when Andy Ruiz fought Anthony Joshua, where some people were thinking, he's the underdog, but he has some legitimate skills and could potentially give Joshua some trouble. There was nothing about Tom Schwarz that really gave Tyson Fury any trouble whatsoever. I mean, he has a good right hand, but Tyson Fury's faced guys with better right hands. Guys like Steve Cunningham and Deontay Wilder. He's not as experienced as some of the other fighters that Fury has faced throughout his career. Fury looks in phenomenal shape. Tom Schwarz just wasn't able to do anything. He doesn't have the footwork, didn't have the hand speed, didn't have the necessary power to knock him down, and the end result was Tyson Fury's second round stoppage. So, overall, I thought, the fight itself, I would give this, if I was grading, if I was a teacher and a student were to give me this fight as their final project, I'd give this an F+. This fight was not good. It was not, it was nothing worth watching whatsoever. You've probably seen clips already online. If you haven't seen the fight, you've probably already seen clips of Fury dodging, a combination from Schwarz and just kind of making Schwarz look like an amateur out there. It's almost borderline ridiculous. But the whole purpose of this fight was not to have a great fight. It was for Fury to give us the show. And in that respect, I feel like that did succeed. You look at Tyson Fury was coming out to, and I personally love this, he was coming out to Living in America from James Brown. It was dressing up, he dressed up exactly like Apollo Creed in Rocky IV when Apollo faced Ivan Drago, and I thought it was really funny for a couple of reasons. One, that he would do that, he really is embracing this, the American fan base, and it was really interesting. Secondly, is the fact that, it made me wonder, did Tyson ever really watch Rocky IV? Because if you remember what happened in Rocky IV, and by the way, spoiler warning on this 3-decade-old movie, I don't even know why I should have to put out a spoiler warning, but whatever. Apollo Creed dies. Ivan Drago kills him in the ring because Rocky, who was in his corner, was too dumb to throw the towel. Referee was too inept to stop the fight, and Apollo Creed died in the ring. Thankfully, we have nothing as close, as serious as what we saw between Tyson Fury and Tom Schwarz. The worst thing was Tom Schwarz, I believe, broke his nose, or at least it looked like he broke his nose early on in the fight from I believe it was a right hand from Fury that landed on the bridge of the nose. So nothing too serious. Was really happy to see Tyson Fury be a good sport and just really sing a lot of praise to Tom Schwarz before and after the fight, really. So that was look nice, but this was a spectacle. As a show, as entertainment, just could get, a B+, A-. We're taking the fight out of the equation. I would give it that. So there's also a lot to unravel here. But you're kind of looking at this fight and this entire thing between Tyson Fury and Top Rank. There's a couple of things that really needs to be discussed. Number one, and this has been something that ESPN has been regurgitating ad nauseum, is this whole notion of Tyson Fury, the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. And, that was like a key word, key phrase that ESPN has been saying so many times in the last couple of weeks. It got to the point that it was so incredibly annoying. And no one really knows, and it kind of created this weird discussion as to the legitimacy of the lineal heavyweight championship, or at least lineal titles in today's era of boxing. And I think that's a really interesting idea to kind of discuss, because in the olden days, when governing bodies were not the norm, or they weren't as abundant as they are today, because aside from the WBA, WBO, WBC, and IPF, you have so many other governing bodies, that are smaller and less significant, but they're there nonetheless. And so you kind of wonder, in the olden days, the lineal title was, it kind of represented the idea that this guy is the real champion. It doesn't matter what other belts he had, what sanctioning body he represented, or where he came from. This man was universally recognized as the champion of the world, the best of the best. That's what the lineal title represented. But as we kind of moved into the 21st century, the idea of the lineal title meaning what it meant back then, it kind of died down a bit. That's not to say that the lineal title has no significance whatsoever. I feel like there may be some idea, and it does matter to a certain extent, but because of the confusion and because of the constant talk about Tyson Fury being the lineal champion because he beat Vladimir Klitschko a couple of years ago, but then he also took that 2.5 year break from boxing. And it kind of created this discussion is, should Tyson Fury still be the lineal heavyweight champion of the world? Because even though he did take the break, he never lost. When he fought Deontay Wilder, the fight ended in a draw, so you can't say Wilder beat Fury because that didn't happen. And so Fury technically is still the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. And I get it from ESPN's side and from Tyson Fury's side why they want to keep saying lineal heavyweight champion of the world, because they want to have something, they want something tangible, even on a conceptual level, something tangible for people to figure out who's the best of the best. And in today's world, because of how diluted the lineal titles are, and no one really has much of an idea how that's decided or who is the lineal champion of every weight class, its meaning has lost a lot in recent years. And so when I look at Tyson Fury, the lineal heavyweight champion, or at least what they believe is still the lineal heavyweight champion of the world, I do believe that Tyson Fury maybe still has it, but let's be honest, when you're the lineal champion of the world, or when you're the world champion, just about of anything, it's easy to say you're the best of the best because you hold a title, or you hold a belt. But when you take 2.5 years off, and you come back, and you start off and you fight guys like Sefer Seferi, Francesco Pianetta, and Tom Schwarz, your credibility does go down a little bit when you keep telling yourself that you are the best in the world, but you're fighting guys whom no one has any idea who they are. And in the cases of those 3 fights, all of those fights ended up being complete and utter jokes. And there's no disrespect to Seferi, Pianetta, and Schwarz, but no one in their right mind would think that they are worthy contenders for the lineal heavyweight championship of the world. And the thing about it is, because there's no governing bodies that kind of that decides on what's the lineal championship, who's the champion, who they should face next. In reality, Tyson can spend the next 10 years of his career fighting the Sefer Seferis and the Tom Schwarzes of the world, never lose, and you can make your claim, I'm still the lineal champion because I never lost. And while there may be truth to that, at the same time, you really haven't done anything to truly show us you're the best in the world. or that you're better than Deontay Wilder or Andy Ruiz or Anthony Joshua. Really, I always understand, for me personally, when I looked at a title, any title whatsoever, I always looked at it as not what the title could mean to you, or for example, what does the title do for your career, but what can you do to bring meaning and credibility to that title. And when you look at all heavyweight champions in reality, there is, let's face it, none of the champions have really faced anyone credible. And of course, I'm excluding Andy Ruiz in this conversation because he just won the unified title. So in this example, I'm using Anthony Joshua instead of Andy Ruiz. When you look at Anthony Joshua, you look at the guys he's faced. Throughout his career, he beat Charles Martin, who won the title because Tyson Fury vacated. You had Anthony Joshua beating Charles Martin. Then you had him beat, I'm not even forgetting, Dominic Brazil. You had him face Dominic Brazil, and he knocked him out in 2 rounds. Then you fight an old, way past his prime, Vladimir Klitschko, who hadn't fought for 2.5 years, and even then, back then, Vladimir Klitschko was still one of the best heavyweights in the world, but that version of Vladimir Klitschko was nowhere near at his absolute peak. And then afterwards, you got Carlos Takam and Joseph Parker. I mean, that was a unification. But then afterwards, Alexander Povetkin. It's not real good. It's not the incredible list of fighters that one would expect when you think of the world heavyweight champion. Anthony Joshua didn't face a murderer's row of fighters to get to the 3 belts that he had. And not only that, he was going up against originally Jarrell Miller, who was a fine heavyweight, but he's not really anyone who anyone thought would put in their personal top 5. Not by a long shot. And I'm kind of looking at everything, and it's like, Joshua has been groomed very well and very well protected by Matchroom Boxing in terms of the type of opponents that he's facing. And overall, we all kind of got swept up on what Joshua's abilities are compared to the level of competition that he's faced. And then you look at Deontay Wilder. I mean, let's be honest, the list of opponents that he's had throughout his title reign, it really hasn't been a great list either. Eric Molina, Johan Duhaupas, Arthur Spilka, Chris Arreola, Gerald Washington, Bermain Stavern, and then you have 2 really good fights against Luis Ortiz and Tyson Fury, followed by Dominic Brazil. Again, not another great list, and I will give Wilder a little bit more leniency when criticizing his resume, because some of those fights were actually backup fights because the original opponents fell through, but it's not like those opponents were that much better than what Wilder ultimately fought in those times. So it's when you really want to showcase yourself at the best heavyweight in the world, you have to prove it. And the only way to prove it is to face the best fighters out there. And for Tyson Fury, for Deontay Wilder, for Anthony Joshua, for Andy Ruiz, it's those 3 other fights. Between those 4 fighters fighting each other, that's how you prove you're the best fighter in the world. And it doesn't matter what titles are at stake. It doesn't matter whether or not the lineal title is credible or not, or it should even be a thing in today's boxing. What matters is what the best fights are, and if they are being made. And they're simply not being made up until now. When, Anthony Joshua essentially has to take a rematch against Andy Ruiz. Because there's no guarantee if you forego the rematch that you'll ever get it. Let's be honest. There's no reason why, as much as some people say, well, maybe Anthony Joshua shouldn't get back into the ring so quickly against Andy Ruiz. Well, here's the problem. If you forego the rematch and decide to take time, there's no guarantee you're ever going to get a chance to face Andy Ruiz again. And that's the thing. Doesn't matter if you're mentally compromised. You have plenty of time. The rematch is going to take at the end of the year. You have plenty of time to recover, both physically and mentally. As for Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, the rematch was already there. It was already laid out. It should have been made earlier this year, but instead you decide to wait until next year or build up to next year. If it works and you have the rematch and it's a super successful event, perfect. That's awesome. However, if it doesn't happen, or if one of them stumbles, or one of them gets injured, and I hope to God that's not the case, or if one of them loses before we get to those big fights, you don't get to complain about the fights not being made. And I'm talking specifically to the boxers and the promoters and the network's executives. Because you had the chance to do it, but you instead decide to wait and try to build up and you get to squeeze a little bit more dollars out of sponsors and consumers and the networks, when clearly the demand is there. There's no reason to wait any longer. WBC, lineal, WBA, WBO, IBF, the belts in these cases don't matter all that much on its own. What matters is what you do with those titles. What matters is what fights are you taking to make those titles legitimate. Because we have this issue in boxing where there are way too many titles. And, I wish we had one singular world champion. In a perfect world, that would be the case. But that's not the case. We don't live in a perfect world. But we do live in a world where the big fights can be made. It's just a matter of whether or not they will actually pull the trigger and do them right now instead of waiting next year, 2 years down the road to make it happen. So now moving on to the World Boxing Super Series, which has really been a very weird tournament thus far. We had the complications between the quarterfinals and the semifinals of this season, the financial issues, the whole controversy between Ivan Baranchyk and the World Boxing Super Series regarding delayed payments and the lack of communication. Ultimately, that got smoothed over, but it's been a very, very weird tournament thus far. And it got even weirder this past weekend when we had the final semifinal card. This one in Riga, Latvia. And you had the final two cruiserweight fights. You had, first off, Junior Dorticos against Andrew Tabiti. And Junior Dorticos gave us a hell of a knockout late in the fight. Scores a vicious right hand to the chin of Andrew Tabiti and knocks him out. Becomes the new IBF cruiserweight champion and advances to the finals. That's not the craziness that I was referring to. I'm talking about the fact that the next fight, Krzysztof Glowacki, and I hope I pronounced it right, if not I apologize, and Maitis Briedis. So, for those of you who have not seen this fight, it's hard to really put it into words what happened in this fight. But here's the gist of it. And I recommend going out of your way to find this fight because it was incredible. The second round had Glowacki throwing an illegal punch to the back of Briedis' head. Clearly, that's, illegal. Should have been I wouldn't be mad if they took off a point of Glowacki. So what happened was, Glowacki hits the illegal punch behind the back of the head. And you have Briedis retaliate by dropping Glowacki with a real bad elbow, like a UFC-style elbow, to the chin. And Glowacki goes down. Referee Robert Bird didn't see the elbow at all. He thought that Glowacki was was actually faking all of it, it was all crazy, and instead of trying to give them, the 5 minutes to rest that you give in a lot of cases, such as this one, or in the cases of low blows, Robert Byrd just kept telling Glowacki, get up, just hurry up and get up and fight, and Glowacki was clearly hurt, not in the right state of mind, and maybe those extra 5 minutes could have been used, and maybe he could have came back in the fight. But regardless, the fight continues. It's still the second round, mind you. They both keep brawling. Briedis knocks down Glowacki. This is real hard, I believe it was a right hand, drops him, and Glowacki gets hurt. This fight could be over any second now. He gets back up. The bell rings. And, I'm no boxing referee or judge or broadcaster or a boxer for that matter. But that usually means the round's over. They ring the bell to signify the end of the second round. And Robert Byrd, the referee, never listened to it. He didn't hear the bell. And they kept fighting, and it was really bizarre. Everybody was wondering, why are they still fighting? The bell is being rung. The bell is still ringing as they are fighting. It's minute 5 seconds in. They keep fighting. And then 10 seconds after the round was supposed to be over, Briedis knocks down Glowacki once again. And it was so surreal. Glowacki was in no shape to continue, and Robert Byrd was just sitting there, and it's like, I don't even listen, I didn't hear the bell, so not my problem. Glowacki was clearly hurt. Round 3 starts. Briedis knocks out Glowacki, becomes the new WBO cruiserweight champion, and advances to the finals. So now comes this whole controversy with Glowacki, the WBSS, the WBO, Robert Byrd. And by the way, Robert Byrd's wife, Adelaide Byrd, was scoring the fight. So, just add another layer of controversy while you're at it. But this whole mess is really left a real sour taste in so many people's mouths, because this was a horrible fight. It shouldn't count. Glowacki had every right in the world to protest this fight, and his management and his team is planning on doing so. This fight should be considering no contest. It shouldn't it shouldn't count towards the record books. Glowacki didn't deserve to lose his world title that way. He didn't deserve to get screwed out of a shot at another world title at the World Boxing Super Series Championship against Junior Dorticos. It was so incredibly unfair for him. First of all, there's a lot to unpack here. There's so much that went wrong into all of this. First of all, and perhaps, was the elbow that Briedis threw. And it wasn't, an incidental elbow or anything. Like, in the post-fight interviews, you listen to him and you could tell, he threw a punch in the back of my head, and he fought dirty, I'm going to fight dirty. He basically was admitting that he threw the elbow on purpose. So, first of all, that should be grounds for disqualification, in my opinion. Or at the least, that's 2 points off of Briedis' score. That's at least 2. So, where do you go from there? Well, there should be a disqualification. It's fine. You want to do it? You don't want to ignore that? You want to ignore that? Fine. Let's move on to after the second round ended. The fact that Briedis got knocked down when he was clearly hurt, still reeling from the elbow, it shouldn't have counted. It should be counted as a no contest, because Briedis was clearly in no condition to continue. It was so bad, it's not even funny. Seriously, look up this fight. This fight is crazy. It's bad. I really don't like how it was refereed. One of the worst refereeing jobs I have ever seen in boxing, in a world title fight, with so much at stake, aside from a title, but another title later on in the future, and the World Boxing Super Series title. There's just so much wrong with this, and it kind of got me thinking. Should there be a an age of, when referees have to retire. Because clearly something needs to be addressed. Whether it be on the refereeing side, on the judging side, there was something not right in hearing, and the fact that Robert Byrd said, I didn't hear the bell. Now, I can't say, he has faulty hearing because I wasn't there at the venue. But when you listen to the fight, you were listening to the fight on the zone and you were watching it, or wherever you were watching it over the world, you can clearly tell that the bell sounded clearly. There was no controversy whether or not the bell was too low or no one rang the bell in time. You could clearly hear the bell being sounded, and the fact that it wasn't was very, very concerning. And I'm just finding it really hard to believe that such a thing can happen. It's so bizarre. And I'm trying to think, maybe Robert Byrd's too old to retire. Now, I'm not trying to be ageist, but clearly you need to be in the right state of mind. You need to have perfect hearing, maybe better than perfect hearing, and the best judgment, best eyesight. You have to be in peak physical condition to prevent stuff like this from happening. And it clearly happened. Clearly something needs to be changed. I don't know what. I don't know what's going to happen to the World Boxing Super Series final. I don't know if the fines are going to remain the same. I don't know if they're going to have to do a rematch. I don't think the rematch is going to happen, by the way. Not a rematch. Not that a rematch shouldn't happen. I don't think it will. Because you look at all the financial issues the tournament has had in the last few months, and now you're telling me that they're going to pony up another fight card, bring up more expensives in terms of purses, securing a venue, working with the zone, and pushing back the entire second season. I just don't see it. So I feel bad for Glowacki. At worst, Glowacki should be ordered to fight the winner of the World Boxing Super Series for the unified WBO and IBF titles. He should. He should absolutely get the first chance, regardless of who wins. Doesn't matter who wins. Glowacki deserves a chance to fight again. Now, I don't know if Glowacki is going to be able to is fully recover because he got beat real hard. And he wasn't just, it wasn't a punch that knocked him out and that's it. No, he was elbowed, he didn't recover, then he kept getting beaten up, then he got dropped 3 times. And clearly something was not right with him. So I don't know how badly damaged he is or anything like that, but there was clearly something. So in a perfect world we would get a rematch. But if you ask me what really will happen, I'd say Dorticos versus Briedis is still going to be your final for the 2 world titles, and I believe Glowacki should get a chance to fight for both belts against the winner in 2020. And now moving on to previewing the biggest fight of this weekend. And that's clearly Andrew Cancio versus Alberto Machado for the WBA Super Featherweight Championship. The regular title, the secondary title, even though, and I've already explained this a long time ago, but this title should be considered the top title, not the super title that Gervonta Davis has, but that's neither here nor there. This is a real interesting fight. I loved the first fight between the two. Andrew Cancio recovered from a knockdown 90 seconds into the fight back in February against Machado. And then he just caught fire and he dropped Machado 3 times just a couple of rounds later and becomes the new champion. It was all great and I loved it. It was fantastic. Now the two of them are going to be rematching once again on the zone on Friday, June 21. And we're going to get a lot of excitement, a lot of fireworks in this one. Also on the card, you got Angel Tito Acosta, the WBO light flyweight champion, who is one of the most exciting guys in boxing today, in my opinion. He's a tremendous knockout artist, and every time you put him on the ring, you're going to see something real fun and real spectacular. But the focus is now on the Cancio-Alberto Machado fight. And there's a lot of interesting things at stake. Number one is what's going to happen if Alberto Machado loses this fight once again. And, obviously he's an extremely tall super featherweight. He's 5'10". It's a wonder he actually can make weight at this point of his career. But it's funny that, the whole weight discussion thing is so prevalent with Machado, because after the fight back in February against Cancio, he said, I'm not sure if I'm going to be taking the rematch. I want a rematch, but I might actually have to move up in weight. And so I asked Alberto Machado, what about the fight, what played into the role, what played into the decision making in trying to, and going for the rematch instead of moving up in weight, and whether or not he still has a future at 130 pounds regardless of what happens against Andrew Cancio. Take a listen. A couple of questions for Alberto. Alberto, obviamente tu meta es ganar el campeonato mundial, pero y tú habías hablado sobre posiblemente subir en peso después de esa primera pelea. El resultado de esta revancha contra Andrew quizás pueda ser determinar si tú vas a subir de peso o no, dependiendo de cómo va el resultado.
The question is that before this, it has been your goal to win a world title, but you have talked about moving up in weight. Will this result determine if you stay at your weight division or if you move up to 135 pounds?
Mira, ahora tengo una gran motivación y solo quiero ganar esta pelea, poder el campeonato de vuelta. Ya nosotros teníamos ya planeado que este era mi último año en 130 libras, porque saben ya mi estatura, mi alcance, tengo potencial para subir de división y pues tengo dos cosas promotoras que están llevando mi carrera, que son mi Coto Promotion y Golden Promotion, y ellos pues sabrán que será mejor, pero mi salud en cuanto a lo que será la división de peso, pues es algo que ya este año sería el último año en este peso, posiblemente.
Right now I have a great motivation, which is to win this fight and become a world champion again. We had it planned since before that this would be my last year at this weight, because if you just look at my height and my reach, I have what it takes to be able to move up in weight. And obviously my promoters also have been telling me as well, who are Miguel Cotto Promotions and Golden Boy. And with regard to my health, when it comes to moving up in divisions, we have decided that this year will be my last year at 130.
Últimamente, ¿qué cambios tú hiciste en este campamento comparado al último?
The question is, what change did you do in this camp when you compare it to what you did for the previous camp, for the previous fight?
El tiempo que saqué para prepararme para esta pelea ha sido la diferencia de la manera en la que me siento y creo que va a ser la diferencia del resultado del 21 de junio. Entendemos todo eso, que es lo que hemos venido trabajando.
The response is, it's the time that I took to prepare myself. That has been the difference, and it is also shown in the way I feel, and the result will be shown in the fight.
Gracias, Alberto. And I also got to ask Andrew Cancio a little bit about his future as the WBA super featherweight champion. Obviously, if he comes out on top, that division is so deep, it's so stacked, and I personally love this division. But when you look at what this division has to offer, you got Gervonta Davis, you got Miguel Berchelt, you got Jamel Herring, you got plenty of other guys that you can make fantastic fights with. So, but there's a lot that he kind of needs to take care of. First of all, he needs to take care of Alberto Machado first. And after that, he also has to potentially take care of a mandatory challenger in Rene Alvarado. And I asked him about that. Does Rene Alvarado get a shot next? Or would you want to go up against Gervonta Davis immediately after this fight? Or what plans does Andrew Cancio, the new super featherweight champion of the world, has when it comes to his post-Machado plans, if he does defeat Machado once again on June 21st at the Fantasy Springs Resorts Casino on DAZN? My first question for Andrew, I mean, obviously you're one of the title holders at 130 pounds, and if you do come out on top in this rematch once more, is your goal to sort of go after the other title holders at that weight class?
I would eventually like to, but I know Rene Alvarado has been the number one mandatory, and I know he's patiently waiting for me Machado to end this little beef right here, and then if I were to come out victorious like I so wanted to, I would like to give him the opportunity to fight for the world title. Him and I had a very great first fight when we fought years back, and he's been on a win streak ever since. So I feel like it would be only appropriate for me to give him the opportunity to fight and try to win the world title against me. And then hopefully after that, then yes, if I come out victorious with him, I would definitely go after the other title holders.
You know, the title, obviously, in the WBA at 130 pounds, you have one of the two titles. Gervonta Davis has the other. But kind of going back the lineage of the title, Alberto Machado won the title when he beat Yair Corrales, when that was considered, I guess, the sole definitive title. Do you consider this fight and for any other future fights with the belt that you have right now to be for the true definitive WBA Super Featherweight Championship?
I would. I think Gervonta Davis needs to step out of his shell and start fighting some real opposition, and I would love to fight him in the future or as soon as we can make it happen if everything goes well. But yes, Alberto Machado he was undefeated and he was fighting a lot of the top oppositions to win this world title, and I do feel like he was a true 130-pound champion.
Thanks, Andrew. Best of luck to the both of you. Buena suerte a los dos.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, if you want my prediction for this fight, as much as I would love Puerto Rico to get another champion, I do think that there was something to Andrew Cancio's, confidence level heading into this fight, and the way he recovered from that first knockdown against Alberto Machado, and the way he just dominated Machado in the ensuing rounds. I think there is something to Cancio being a true legitimate elite fighter, 130 pounds. Now, do I think this fight is going to be as short as their first encounter? No, I don't think so. I think this is going to be a longer fight. I think we're going to see a more measured Alberto Machado. I think he's going to take the first few rounds to sort of get himself in a good rhythm, establish the jab a little bit, maybe throw the right hand on occasion, but not going to see anything too crazy in the first couple of rounds. And I think the middle rounds, we're kind of starting to see the fireworks that we saw in the first fight. And ultimately, I think Cancio stops Alberto Machado late, maybe the 10th, 11th round. And I think Andrew Cancio goes on to retain his WBA Super Featherweight Championship. Lastly, we got to talk about this Kazuto Ioka and Aston Palicte fight. And I brought on a special guest to talk about that with me. So, for those of you who weren't aware, Kazuto Ioka became the new WBO Super Flyweight Champion when he beat Aston Palicte on a fight that was streamed on UFC Fight Pass. Incredibly enough, the MMA streaming site actually streamed a boxing card from Japan. And it was a very fun fight. Ioka was very, very good in this fight. Was very cool, calm, and collected, in my opinion. And then you look at, the way he performed. It was outstanding. It was, his upper body movement was fantastic. His defensive awareness was spectacular. Footwork was on point. Was frustrating Aston Palicte, the much taller and longer Aston Palicte. Throughout this fight, Palicte wasn't able to land the right hand to save his life. He was aggressive, but he didn't really do anything that was all too effective on Kazuto Ioka. But that's enough about me. It's time to bring on our special guest, Nick Skok of Ring TV and Ring Magazine. You can follow him on Twitter at @NoSparring. Take a listen as Nick and I discuss Kazuto Ioka and what the future means for the new WBO Super Flyweight Champion. Joining me now on the podcast is someone who I've been able to make great friends with in the last few weeks over our love of Japanese boxing and our love of Five Guys, who we both agree is the best burger in the United States, bar none. Nick Skok of Ring Magazine, or if you follow him on Twitter, No Sparring. Nick, thanks so much for coming to the show and talk this really, really good and really interesting Kazuto Ioka and Aston Palicte fight from Chiba, Japan yesterday. Nick, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on the show again. I really appreciate the hospitality, and yeah, Five Guys is you're making me hungry right now. It's just about lunchtime out here on the West Coast. But yeah, great midweek fight between Ioka and Palicte. I love that we don't have to wait all the way until the weekend to get a really solid action fight like that. What did you think of the fight?
You know, it's really interesting because there was a part of me that was kind of thinking this fight could end up being really, really good. And for the most part, I thought it was actually pretty good. The action was really great. Palicte did his job in trying to make the fight, as aggressive and as exciting as possible. And Ioka had a really smart game plan in sort of negating Palicte's length by making Palicte really reach and miss with those wild punches. His footwork was phenomenal. Defensive awareness was on point. Ioka was simply phenomenal. I was kind of waiting for a moment in the fight where it was kind of going to get into second gear and really get action-packed, and I don't think we really quite got that, but that was really more so from a really smart game plan from Kazuto Ioka, and you can tell, right after the 7th round, where Palicte just threw wild haymakers left and right throughout the first half of the round, and he kind of tired himself out. I remember Ioka throwing a wild left hook upstairs that kind of hurt Aston Palicte late in the 7th round. I kind of thought to myself, this fight is, I don't want to say it's over, but Ioka's really going to start dominating this fight if he wasn't already. So for those of you who didn't watch it, the fight was on UFC Fight Pass. It's interesting for a number of reasons, and we'll get into that. And the first one is, this was the first world title fight UFC Fight Pass has shown ever since Roy Jones Jr. Boxing Promotions and UFC signed this multi-year promotional and broadcast deal. And secondly is that Ioka became the first Japanese man and second ever Japanese fighter in history to win world titles in 4 different weight classes, the other being Naoki Fujioka, who did it in 5 different weight classes. And this, the story of Ioka in relation to his popularity in Japan is very interesting and very controversial. You know this far better than I do, but it said there was a lot of personal drama involving him and his now ex-wife, and he wasn't well liked in Japan for a while.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story, and one that I just sort of keep learning about. The more information that comes my way, everything that I get has to be translated, or I have to learn, secondhand. And so I'm always playing catch up out there. But the great news is I'm one of the few people from the Western side of things that gets a chance to learn any of these secrets, and then I get a chance to share them with everyone else. And so we're sort of learning about these older soap opera dramas that have been sort of playing out over there for a while. And yeah, Kazuto Ioka has been a mainstay in the Japanese boxing scene for several years, constantly headlining some of their more prolific shows on New Year's Eve. And that being their biggest night of the year for boxing, became the biggest face of boxing until Ryota Murata came around. Anyways, fast forward a little bit later on into his career, and Ioka ends up, using his fame to meet and marry a beautiful, famous singer who goes by the name of Nana, and she was not a fan of his boxing whatsoever. Meanwhile, Ioka's father had a bit of I don't even want to call it a run-in with Yakuza, the Japanese mafia. He, from what I've been told, is the Japanese Yakuza. And that being said, there was some tax evasion issues, and his gym was forced to close. And so with the gym closing, and with now some family issues brewing, and with his new wife not wanting him to be a fighter anymore because, she'd rather go out and, be in front of cameras where, everyone looks good as opposed to having black and blue eyes. Ioka called it quits for a while. He took, 18 to 24 months off. As this progressed, Ioka was sort of seeing how well the superflies were doing out in America and really started to catch the bug again to want to fight. He didn't like the fame or notoriety that he had in Japan and was now just wondering if he could just fight in America away from all of the distractions. But the distractions never stopped. Even being out in Vegas, he stayed distracted, ended up meeting someone else. I don't think it was actually in Vegas, but it was another Japanese woman, and ends up cheating on his very beautiful wife, and ends up knocking this mistress up. That, in conjunction with the fact he wanted to come back and be a fighter, forced the two of them to get a very public divorce. And Nana actually posted the divorce papers online on Twitter to show everyone. I've never seen anyone post divorce papers on Twitter before.
No way. I did not see that.
Yeah, so as this continued to play out, then the father started to come back in the mix a little bit and started to try to support his son from afar. But Ioka was not allowed to fight in Japan because he was not registered to any specific gym. So we saw him on the Superfly 3 card in LA, and then we saw him headlining a card last New Year's Eve in Macau. And it wasn't only until recently, in the last couple of months, that he signed to a new gym out of Tokyo, in Saitama, actually, just north of Tokyo. And he was now able to, once again, fight in Japan and made his quote-unquote homecoming. But being the Japanese culture and what it is, the media had to scrutinize him. Even if they didn't really disagree with some of the things he did or didn't do, they had to, say, hey, we're not exactly a fan of this guy. He doesn't represent the sort of values that the Japanese culture is there to showcase, and therefore we're not exactly a fan of his, and he can be the sort of quasi bad guy. He's kind of like a Floyd Mayweather, if you will, because Floyd was always a massive viewer, a massive showcase and a huge money guy, but people didn't like him. Most people tuned in because they loved to hate him. They wanted to see him lose, and I think to some degree there might be some of that in Japan. But on the flip side, it's like they're also rooting for him because they're rooting for their countrymen. So they're in this sort of clash of contradictions where do we want to root for him because he's our countryman, or do we want to root against him because he's just not exactly the most upstanding guy?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Mayweather because I remember in the UFC Fight Pass broadcast they were mentioning how there were certain parts of Mayweather's game where you can kind of see it in the Kazuto Ioka, from the footwork, from the defensive abilities. But I think Ioka, at least pound for pound, hits much harder than Floyd ever did throughout his career. And he doesn't have the soft, brittle hands that Mayweather had to deal with throughout the second half of his career. But yeah, I can kind of see where you're coming from. So now with this win, it's really interesting to gauge where does Ioka rank among who are the most popular stars in Japanese boxing, because for a long time it was Ryota Murata kind of laid claim to that, but I don't know how much that is true ever since he lost to Rob Brand. Now Inoue is slowly becoming this absolute international megastar. Then you got plenty of other guys who are also on the rise, guys like Kosei Tanaka, Kenshiro, Hirota Kiyoguchi.
Yeah, so all of those guys are very interesting. So obviously Inoue is doing his thing, and a lot of it is tied also to the network. So what we've seen is Murata has been carried by Fuji TV, and as has Inoue to some extent as well. So the two of them are on the big time network of Fuji TV. We see now Kenshiro is going to be on the Murata undercard, so they're trying to build his profile up as well. But Kosei Tanaka, you mentioned, he's a 3-division champion already after 12 fights. But he's out there in Nagoya, and he's really not getting much publicity or exposure out there yet. So he's not close to the other guys to this point. Kiyoguchi, who was on the undercard of the Ioka fight, him and Ioka are both fighting under the TBS banner, Tokyo Broadcast System, and that's where the Watanabe Gym has sort of kept their fighters. They've been able to secure fights on New Year's Eve the last couple years after Ioka went into a semi-retirement with what he was doing. So they had Ryoichi Taguchi featured on TBS. They've had Kyoguchi featured a couple of times, and they've had their fighters on there. So it's really dependent on the networks and what they want to do with it. That being said, the fight that's really being built outside of this that we're seeing is Kyoguchi, who is on the undercard, and he is the WBA champion, and also Kenshiro, who's the WBC champion in the junior flyweight division. He's going to be featured on the Murata undercard, and what their plan is to do is to have them both win, have them both take care of a mandatory, and then hopefully have them unify at the end of the year. But if we go back to who's the top dog in the Japanese boxing world, right now, I think Murata's he's still clinging to hope. He's got the Rob Grant rematch coming up in July. He's got the home field advantage in Osaka, which isn't far from his hometown of Nara. And if he should come out victorious in that, we could see the Murata game, pick back up in speed and what goes with that. Meanwhile, Inoue isn't going anywhere, and Ioka's there too. So right now, it's just we're in this golden era of Japanese boxing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. I've noticed that there is not just a greater interest in Japanese boxing inside of Japan, but also from outside. And I think that's partly due to all these different networks and streaming services kind of, giving us international fans a much better opportunity to watch these fights. Yeah, it's kind of a bummer to have to wake up really early in the morning to have to watch these fights, but I think the hardcore fans who know how great these fights can be, I think they're more than happy to wake up. I was more than happy to wake up at 8 a.m. to watch the fight on Wednesday. And overall, looking at Ioka's resume, it's incredible how deep that resume is, all the names that he's faced, all the titles that he's won, and at the very least, he is not the worst 4-division title holder in this. I think it's now 19 or 20 guys who have won titles in 4 different weight classes. I think that Adrian Broner possesses the weakest resume out of all those guys. But what's interesting, because I believe it was, I don't remember, maybe it was Jimmy Smith on the UFC broadcast who was essentially saying that this is a guy who, at the end of his career, we will more than likely see him have a place in Canastota, New York, in the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And on paper, the resume's already there. It's hard to really argue that he doesn't, or at least, deserve serious consideration for the Hall of Fame. And I'm kind of curious to see what your thoughts are on Ioka's in-ring career, because it's outside of the ring, it's a completely different story. But inside the ring, it's hard to argue Ioka's accomplishments. Being a 4-division world champion.
Absolutely. I think the announcers right. I didn't actually watch it on the UFC Pass. I watched the Japanese version, which I've become a little bit accustomed to. And just kind of going off on a tangent for a second, it's funny watching the Japanese broadcast a bit, because the rounds are actually counted up to 3 minutes. It starts at 1 second, goes up to 3 minutes, whereas we count down to 0, and you hear the sticks click with 10 seconds left. So I get a little bit confused sometimes how much time is left in the round. But going back to Ioka, I think he probably did punch his ticket to the Hall of Fame there. When you're a 4-division champion, it's got to be a gimme. You're right about his accomplishments inside the ring. His only losses were to Ruin Rung earlier on, and then Donnie Nietes, who himself became a 4-division champion with that win. So Ioka has done, I think, more than enough to validate himself there. And now the question is, where does he go from here? It's a stacked division. We had the Superfly, tournaments, if you want to call them that, going on HBO for a few years. But actually, through all of that, we never actually saw a single unification. So I think is what we really need to see in this division is some type of unification, whether it be between Ioka and one of the other champions, Estrada, Yafai, and Nakajas, or just any of those other guys, mix and match them together. So it's really curious to see where Ioka goes from here. He has options because that was a mandated fight. He should have a voluntary next. So some options within the WBO rankings might be Akira Yagashi, who himself is a three-division champion out of Japan. You have Sho Ishida, who's there for the taking, and then there's another mandatory fight that's it's an eliminator that's being played out between Koki Ito and then Puerto Rican Javier Cintron. So
yeah, Javier Cintron.
Yeah, that fight is in the makings, and they're gonna, I think, fight in August. But he might not be. Their scheduling is a little bit off right now, I think, for a direct fight with Ioka, right?
Yeah. They said, I actually, like 5 minutes before you called, BoxRec Gray on Twitter, who basically is, at least the public face of BoxRec.com, he said that fight's going to be in Florida on August 2, so... Yeah, so the timing-wise, it's looking like the winner of that fight might just be mandated for 2020 and not, for 2019 because... And I expect that fight to be a title eliminator, given that these two are going to be in the top 3 of the WBO rankings when the new updates... actually, they should be coming out in any time soon, actually. So I don't think I don't think that fight's going to happen until 2020, but I mean, there's, at least for domestic fights in Japan, there are a lot of good fights out there for Ioka, and you mentioned potential unifications. You revealed on Twitter right before we started recording about the priorities for Juan Francisco Estrada and Jerwin Ancajas, who are the WBC and the IBF Super Flyweight champions, respectively. Floor is yours if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I was just going back and forth with Sean Gibbons, who's a pretty powerful and influential advisor in the game. He's got a lot of names under his banner, the most notable being Manny Pacquiao, and he obviously helps out with the Manny Pacquiao promotions and the fighters that go along with it. One being Jerwin Ancajas, a very credible champion at 115, the IBF champion, and Sean went ahead and informed me that their priority right now is to make a unification. Barring that Ancajas can get his mandatories all taken care of and Estrada can get his mandatories all taken care of, they would like to have Ancajas go up against El Gallo, Juan Francisco Estrada in the very near future. And so that, I think, would be something that's been missing from the super flyweight division. And if I had any say, I would make that fight probably for the Ring Magazine Championship, because I would put them as the top 2 champions at 115 right now, even after Ioka's performance, which is brilliant. But I kind of feel like he's got more to prove in the division, whereas Estrada I think is probably the number 1 guy in the division. Then Ancajas has, just continues to win. And if we're talking about all the other champions, I think Yafai is probably the weakest of the bunch. So I would probably want to see Estrada and Ancajas made for the Ring Magazine Championship belt for the number 1 overall, super fly guy there. But yeah, if that gets made, I think that's great for the division, and I think that just sets up more possibilities for everyone else, Ioka included. And Ancajas is tied with ESPN and Estrada's with the Zone, but that shouldn't be a problem, because as we just saw, another unification was just made between Hooker and Ramirez, and that fight's coming up. So if Top Rank and DAZN are making deals, that's fine by me. This is good for boxing, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm all for that fight. It's, I think that could potentially be Fight of the Year worthy, especially with how great Jerwin Ancajas looked in his fight against Ryoichi Funai last month. So I fully expect this to be a fantastic fight whenever it's going to take place. Nick, thank you so much for coming out to the show. I really do appreciate it. I always love talking Japanese boxing with you. Always learn a little bit more about the local boxing scene there, and you do outstanding work. If you guys want to check him out on Twitter, it's @NoSparring. He does great work for Ring TV, and I look forward to talking to you again, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can catch up in July after the Murata and Kenshiro fights.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to seeing those fights. And again, Nick, thanks so much for coming on board.
Awesome. Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you next time.
And that was Nick Skok of Ring TV and Ring Magazine. On Twitter, you can follow him at No Sparring. Really, really great guest. I love talking Japanese boxing with him. He's a great guy. I love his work that he does out there and truly loves the Japanese boxing scene. So I do recommend checking his work out. And I think that about does it for this edition of the Fightful Boxing Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Carlos Toro 360. Go ahead and subscribe to our new Fightful MMA and Boxing YouTube channel if you haven't already. Leave us a review on iTunes. We really do appreciate it. Give us a thumbs up. Comments if you have any questions you want me to answer in any future episodes, or you just want to give any feedbacks, positive or negative. All is welcome. From this edition of the Fightful Boxing Podcast, I'm Carlos Toro of Fightful.com, signing out.